The bench press doesn't actually work the chest. This is one of these bizarre claims that you hear bros and bodybuilders and people make all the time. Yet when you have actual experts who are themselves bodybuilders who have advanced degrees in the field, they usually even scoff at this sort of idea that you can somehow bench press even remotely correctly without using the chest as the primary mover. And it's really a ludicrous statement when you think about it, but you always hear it in various bodybuilding circles. And it's usually from guys who claim, well, I don't feel my chest on the bench press. And these same people oftentimes literally have no idea how to perform a bench press. Like they usually do some weird ego lifting flop press where they bounce the bar off their chest, lift their butt up into the air, or they don't touch their chest at all. No scapular retraction, things like that. And so you have to look at them and go, well, what muscles do you think are being used in the bench press? And that's the question that I would ask these people. Because, they'll say things like, well, you can use a ton of weight, but it doesn't really work the chest. And it's like, all right, not just 1 rep maxes, but how about a 5 rep max? How about an 8 rep max? How about a 10 rep max? Like, what muscles do you actually think are moving the weight? Because if you're using a much heavier weight, and you can, for the same number of reps even, many times, if we're talking about weight, we're talking about weight versus reps. You're using considerably more weight than most other exercises that they want to use for their chest. And you're usually moving at a pretty big distance. And we'll get into arching in a second, how arching actually increases pec activation. But they will say these things, and it's like, well, what do you think is actually moving that weight? Do you think it's your tendons? It's like, well, no, it's other muscles. It's like, well, what other muscles? Your only other options are the anterior deltoids and the triceps. Because if you look at what's going on there and just look at the movement, the only real muscles that are involved as primary movers at all would have to be the pectorals, the front delts, and your triceps. So are you guys telling me that you're moving all of that weight? Like if you throw 225 on there and you crank out 10 or 12 reps, are you telling me the triceps did all of that? Then why can't you do 225 for some work sets with tricep extensions? Why can't you just throw that on a bar and do skull crushers with it? Like, oh, well, because no, that's a smaller isolation movement. It's like, but you're moving a similar weight, a similar distance. I mean, a tricep extension uses almost as much range of motion as a bench press. So you should be able to use the same amount of weight. So if you can do 10 reps of 225 on the bench, you should be able to do at least 200 or more on a tricep extension on a barbell for 10, right? Like, oh, no, I could use like 60 pounds, 70 pounds. Well, then the triceps can't be moving all that weight. It's just not possible. They're obviously contributing, but what's moving the weight? The deltoids? You'll take the same guy and they can't overhead press the same weight. All these people will stand there and claim, well, the overhead press is terrible for the whole shoulders. It only works the front delts, right? The same circles of people will say that. They'll say, oh, it doesn't work the side delts, really. It's just a front delt exercise and some tricep. It's like, well, let's come over to that same logic. How many of the guys who will make this claim who can bench press 225 for a set of 10, how many of them overhead press 225 for a set of 10? None of them. It's not even possible. Not even possible. Anyone who could do 225 for a set of 10 on the overhead press can probably rep out 315 to 350 on the flat bench for 10. They're not even in the same ballpark. Why is the weight so different? Well, it's because the chest is doing it. The pectorals are contributing massively. They are the primary mover. Now, you can use really bad form and you can reduce their ability to contribute. Like you can de-emphasize them slightly by using terrible form. You can make it slightly more front delt dominant. But if you do that, what happens? You're weaker. You're weaker. So usually what guys will do is, again, so they can move more weight, they just won't touch their chest. If someone told them, oh, it's dangerous to go too low, but then the same guys will be scared to arch. It's always this fascinating situation. The same guys who talk about, well, you shouldn't go too deep on the bench press, are the same guys who will want to use dumbbells. Well, dumbbells had the potential to give you a deeper stretch than the barbell does, right? So if you're scared about going too deep on a barbell, you need to run from dumbbells, because that's the benefit they have, is the deeper stretch. But then they'll be afraid to arch. Let's come over to the point. The pecs are the primary mover. All three of those muscles are the primary movers. But in a properly executed bench press, the pectorals contribute the most, with a very large secondary emphasis on the front delts and then the triceps. And for many people, those can be limiting factors. But your chest is going to get worked heavily. Now, how could you de-emphasize the chest? Well, you could not retract your scapula. In other words, if you leave your shoulders rolled completely forward, if you have your shoulders completely rolled forward and your scapula spread apart doing a lat spread, which is how some guys bench, by the way, guess what? You can remove some of the chest involvement. But it usually comes at the expense of the amount of weight you can handle, and it usually leads to shoulder injuries. So step number one, if you retract your scapula and squeeze them together, pull them back and down, your pecs automatically get a deeper stretch at the bottom. If they get a deeper stretch at the bottom, they get the weight started easier. Right? You'll recruit more chest to it. And if you haven't been benching that way, particularly trying it with a pause from a dead stop off the chest, if you haven't been doing it that way, try it and then come back. Every person who claims the bench doesn't work chest, who has this rolled shoulder thing, as soon as they retract the scapula in bench press, they come back and talk about how they felt like they were going to rip a pec off. They've never felt their chest like that before. Maybe even when doing a fly. Right, because you've never really used your chest on anything. Now all of a sudden they're using twice as much pec on the bench press. They're benching somewhat correctly. And the chest gets involved. Same thing. Pause on the chest. The reason I say pause is not that touch and go can't work the pecs. It's that most guys don't know how to touch and go. You guys will see me doing this speed work here and not understand what I'm doing. Speed work is a different beast. It's done touch and go, but we're also doing a reversal at high speed. In other words, I'm using the pecs to slow and reverse the weight immediately at the bottom, not a bounce off the chest. Novice lifter is not going to, doesn't have the control to do that correctly. All right, it's a different animal. Then we talk about the arch. You guys see me arching on this speed work. The arch does remove range of motion, but unless you do a really excessive cheater arch, which some powerlifters do, most people are not flexible enough to do. The research shows that it actually works the chest more. If you arch to where, if you look where I'm at, my mid-back, right now that's touching. My traps are the only thing touching the bench. Got an arch. Scapular retracted, they're pulled down and back. If you try benching like that and you've never done it, you're going to feel a cramp in your pecs like you've never felt on a bench before. The research shows that the actual arch, because of the angle involved with the mild decline that it creates, a very mild decline, actually recruits more pectoral. Recruits more pectoral, not less. Even though you're slightly reducing the range of motion, you're taking a couple inches out usually. You're taking a couple inches out, but it's still a pretty long range of motion. It recruits more pectoral. Well, let's come over to the same guys who are freaking out about going too low. You could hurt your shoulder going too deep, touching your chest. Well, if you do the arch, you cut a couple inches out of the bottom, and you change the angle to where the way it aligns with the pecs, it recruits them even more. If you've never benched that way, particularly if you take a reasonably wide grip, right, you actually are touching the rings, not way inside like on a close grip, and you arch like that, the way I'm doing, you retract your scapula, you're going to feel more in your chest than you've probably felt on any exercise. You're going to feel it even more. And if you look at the biomechanics, it's very obvious that the chest is the primary mover. It's very obvious. So this is an absolutely ludicrous idea. It's an absolutely ludicrous idea that the bench press cannot build your chest. And I'm not saying it's the only exercise anyone ever needs for their chest. Let's not go to that crazy extreme. But it can build one heck of a base. It can build one heck of a base. And the chest is a primary mover on the bench, and it happens to build your whole upper body pretty effectively, or at least contribute to some extent. Alright guys, well that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.